Law enforcement agencies, whose primary responsibility is to ensure public safety, often demonstrate an inability to fulfill their direct obligations. Their passivity and negligence become the cause of horrific events that could have been entirely prevented, as evidenced by the story we're about to tell. On June 12, 1984, in the Italian city of Salerno, home to over 10,000 residents, Antonella Russa was born. The girl became the second daughter in a family where an atmosphere of mutual love and respect prevailed. Her parents created an environment filled with care and support for their children, allowing Antonella to develop harmoniously and make ambitious plans for the future. Education became the girl's top priority. Her natural qualities, inner strength and determination, combined with balance and endurance. In difficult circumstances, she could display strength of character, yet those close to her always felt her genuine kindness and warmth. Antonella's first 10 years passed carefree in the family circle, with her parents and sister in their own home, where she made plans for the future. However, fate made cruel adjustments to the measured life of the Russa family. Father Francesco unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack. This loss became a true catastrophe for all family members, especially for Antonella, who had a deep emotional connection with both parents. The most difficult stage of their lives began. Mother Lucia, along with daughters Milena and Antonella, were forced to take on all the responsibility that Francesco had previously borne. The older daughter hadn't yet reached the age for official employment, and the younger one was even further from that possibility. Therefore, Lucia began working with doubled energy. Despite all the difficulties, the women managed to unite and support each other during this painful time. The loss of Francesco paradoxically strengthened their family bonds, making them even closer. This gave the mother the strength to overcome obstacles and move forward. When Milena grew up, she quickly found work and began helping her mother. Later, the girl focused on arranging her own life and moved out on her own. Antonella completely devoted herself to education, dividing her time between studying and family. Her help with household matters became invaluable support for Lucia. Thanks to her persistence in studying, Antonella successfully completed school with excellent results and realized her dream of university education. Her choice fell on the tourism industry, a field that had attracted her since her teenage years. The girl became a student at the University of Salerno, choosing the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Literature, where she immediately demonstrated her potential and gained the favor of the teaching staff. Once again concentrating all her energy on acquiring knowledge and achieving her set goals, Antonella demonstrated brilliant academic results. Lucia felt proud of her daughter and was confident in her promising future. However, diligence in studies alone proved insufficient for complete success. Financial resources were needed. After losing her husband, Lucia completely devoted herself to professional activities and raising her children. More than a decade had passed, during which other areas of life remained outside her attention. And she had no desire to change anything. The woman considered her primary task to provide her children with opportunities to realize the plans they had once made together with their beloved husband. For this purpose, she worked at a leather goods manufacturing plant near their home. Despite the physical difficulty of such work, the woman successfully overcame all challenges. Complications arose after Antonella became a university student. As her daughter grew older, so did the financial needs, as university education required significant expenses. The younger daughter always strived for financial independence and didn't want to be a burden on the family, so she found part-time work at the beginning of her studies. This significantly eased the mother's situation. The girl not only provided for her own needs but also continued to help at home. Observing Lucia's dedication, she sought to repay all the care and love. The older daughter had been living independently for a long time and fully supporting herself. The younger one also began earning a living, though she continued living with her mother. Lucia finally had free time, as the intensity of work could be reduced. Gradually, the woman began to feel lonely. Antonella spent all day between university and work, appearing at home infrequently. This prompted Lucia to think about the possibility of arranging her personal life. On the recommendation of friends, the 45-year-old woman registered on a dating platform. She hoped that life would give her a meeting with someone she could love and receive mutual feelings from. Soon she met 50-year-old Antonio Carbonaro, a resident of the small town of Nusco. His home was located approximately 50 kilometers from Salerno. The man had also experienced the loss of his wife and was raising 3 children who lived with him. Antonio worked hard. He owned a blacksmith workshop where he created products that were in demand. Outwardly, he gave the impression of being a balanced, stable, and successful person, ready to create a new family and seek personal happiness. Antonio's life circumstances, raising children after losing his wife, closely resembled Lucia's situation. This similarity contributed to their rapid bonding during correspondence. With each new fact about her conversation partner, the woman became increasingly convinced of their spiritual closeness. Initially, Lucia and Antonio exchanged pleasant messages online, but from the beginning, the woman felt mutual affection and emotional attraction. When the daughters learned about their mother's new acquaintance, they enthusiastically supported her, encouraging the development of romantic relations, as they noticed her hesitation about transitioning from virtual communication to real meetings. Eventually, online communication transformed into a personal meeting, after which a full relationship began. Milena and Antonella sincerely rejoiced at Antonio's appearance in their mother's life. Both had long dreamed that Lucia would find a partner and build a new relationship. The daughters witnessed how for many years their mother had tirelessly worked for their future, solving problems on her own that sometimes proved difficult even for complete families. Now that Lucia was alone, the daughters wanted her happiness and the opportunity to finally rest. Until this time, the woman had spent almost 15 years in solitude, losing the skills of romantic communication with men, which, in the girl's opinion, explained her uncertainty. For weeks after the beginning of personal meetings, Antonio expressed a desire to take the relationship to a qualitatively new level, to start living together. Lucia didn't object but didn't want to leave her hometown and be separated from her daughters. Antonio showed readiness for compromise and agreed to move in with her. He temporarily left his children and relatives, moving into the house where his beloved and younger daughter Antonella lived, who was continuing her university studies. The girl planned to stay with her mother until receiving her diploma. For the sake of moving, Antonio had to leave his own blacksmith business in Nusco. Lucia actively helped him find employment in Salerno. Mutual assistance traditionally prevailed in the Russa family, so mother and daughter surrounded Antonio with attention and comprehensive support. Antonella approved of her mother's decision and immediately began showing sincere respect for Antonio. It seemed they quickly found common ground, and the close-knit Russa family had finally overcome the consequences of the painful loss of the head of the family. Unfortunately, this idyll proved to be an illusion. Only a few weeks had passed after the man's relocation when Antonella recorded the first danger signals. Antonio began to demonstrate his true nature. It turned out he was prone to pathological jealousy, showed cruelty when irritated, and demonstrated possessive behavior. The girl had sufficient experience recognizing such personalities, as during her university years, Antonella had joined the activist movement for women's rights and combating domestic violence. This knowledge allowed her to instantly identify the threat emanating from Antonio. From then on, Lucia and Antonella regularly discussed this problem. The woman began to doubt the wisdom of her choice of partner and the hasty decision to live together. However, events developed so rapidly that she didn't have time to think everything through, and she no longer dared to retreat. At the same time, the younger daughter realized that improvement wouldn't occur. The relationship had crossed a critical threshold, after which a manipulative personality becomes genuinely dangerous. She had serious concerns that her mother's attempt to break up with Antonio could have tragic consequences. In Antonella's opinion, her mother's independent character and inner strength caused discomfort in the man, as he was set on a completely different format of relations. He was irritated by the absence of need for his protection. The Russa family consisted of people capable of independently solving their own difficulties. In his previous marriage, Antonio occupied the position of unquestionable authority who dictated rules to everyone around him. In this family, such a model proved ineffective. Every attempt to establish control met with resistance. Lucia hoped that this approach would help preserve personal boundaries. She believed the man would adapt to the new conditions and the situation would normalize. Despite this, Antonio continued to increase attempts to control his partner's life and even her daughter's. Their characters only intensified his irritation, provoking an increase in aggressiveness. The woman was inclined to think that such behavior was connected with the move and cardinal changes in her partner's life. She hoped that the tension would pass and he would calm down. However, months passed, and his actions increasingly took on signs of psychological abuse. The man tried to totally control his partner's life, began systematically appearing at her workplace demanding meetings. Such visits had nothing in common with displays of care. Each time he insisted on a detailed report about Lucia's activities, her contacts and activities. The man even made attempts to penetrate the factory territory to personally check what the woman was doing during the workday. These attempts proved unsuccessful. Such behavior looked absolutely unacceptable. Antonella listened with alarm to her mother's stories about Antonio's actions, realizing the level of danger from the person with whom they had connected their lives. What particularly frightened her was the awareness that the most dangerous stage in such cases is the period of attempting to break up with a manipulator. This required special caution in actions. Lucia continued to interpret his actions as specific displays of attention, although doubts gradually grew even in her. Antonella openly expressed concern about the man's behavior. She immediately recognized the danger signals but didn't have a clear understanding of the correct strategy of action. The girl worried about her mother's safety. Passivity didn't improve the situation. Antonio didn't stop displaying pathological jealousy and making baseless accusations against his partner. It seemed he deliberately escalated conflicts to an extreme state, provoked scandals, and created domestic scenes. Over time, the situation went beyond all acceptable limits. The man began making threatening gestures toward Lucia, although he hadn't yet applied physical violence. Of course, Antonella couldn't tolerate even minimal threats to her mother. Her late father had never allowed physical aggression toward family members. Such behavior was absolutely unacceptable to them. The girl made efforts to protect her mother, demonstrated courage, warned about the possibility of contacting law enforcement, and initially this had an effect. In parallel with the intensification of pressure from the domestic aggressor, Antonella increasingly emphasized to her mother the error of her choice and possible tragic consequences. Unfortunately, the woman tended to minimize the seriousness of the situation, and Antonio skillfully manipulated her feelings, provoking feelings of guilt. After each display of jealousy, he justified himself with stress and cardinal life changes, as for the sake of moving to this city he had been forced to abandon his previous life, leave his workshop, create inconveniences for his own children, who now lived with relatives. Unfortunately, this tactic yielded results. Lucia began to sympathize with him, to feel pity. Antonella understood the need to help her mother, couldn't leave a loved one in a difficult situation, so she took the blows of every aggressive outburst from Antonio, standing up to defend her mother. Such actions could only slow the escalation of conflict but not stop an unbalanced personality. Lucia continued trying to normalize the atmosphere, while her daughter insisted that all these manifestations were harbingers of future tragedy, and her premonitions proved correct. On February 14, 2007, on Valentine's Day, Lucia organized a joint lunch for her daughters and housemate. She hoped that the festive atmosphere would promote reconciliation and strengthening of family ties, and Antonio would refrain from the aggressive behavior of recent times. The woman carefully prepared everything, considering that Antonio and her older daughter practically didn't communicate. Even Antonella believed that the guest's presence would distract his attention and help contain negative emotions. However, instead of the expected harmony, from the first minutes the man was seized by another fit of jealousy. The reason for his displeasure was missed phone calls during Lucia's time at work. The woman explained this by workload, but the conflict quickly escalated. Lucia tried to defuse the atmosphere, emphasizing the inappropriateness of such behavior on a holiday. However, the situation reached a critical point in minutes. Antonio again raised his voice at his partner, but this day he crossed the line, he struck Lucia in the face, calling her a cheater. Daughters Antonella and Milena immediately rushed to defend their mother, stopped the aggressor and ordered him to leave their home. However, the man categorically refused, arguing that he had moved here for their mother's sake, left his entire previous life and had no intention of returning. The celebration was ruined, and the victim of domestic violence finally realized the pathological nature of the situation. Despite this, Lucia didn't expel the man, deciding to give her housemate one more chance. Another important meeting was planned for February 18th, this time with the participation of Antonio's 3 children. The event aimed at reconciliation, but from the very beginning, strong tension was felt between those present. The man clearly restrained himself, which made his children feel uncomfortable. Lucia's daughters were also ready for conflict at any moment. Lucia was forced to acknowledge the loss of those feelings for Antonio that had accompanied the beginning of their acquaintance and his move. The meeting passed in a restrained atmosphere, but after its conclusion, the woman spoke with her younger daughter. Lucia confessed her fear of repeating unpleasant incidents, awareness of the unchangeable nature of the man's character, and desire to end the relationship. Antonella again emphasized that escaping from an abuser's influence poses the greatest danger. A new task arose, to find a way to inform the man about the breakup so that he would calmly move out and not bother them further. However, circumstances decided everything themselves. Lucia finally became convinced of the correctness of her decision on February 19th at 6 in the morning when she was getting ready for work. She woke up at the same time as Antonio, who in another fit of jealousy didn't want to let her go to the factory. Of course, this looked absurd. The woman had to go to her shift, and no alternatives were considered. Disobedience provoked a new conflict. The man attacked her with his fists. This was the most brutal display of violence since the beginning of their acquaintance. After the beating ended, Lucia tried to expel Antonio from the house. However, he not only refused to comply with the demand but also appeared at her workplace demanding she remain silent about the domestic conflict. Fortunately, she didn't listen. She informed her daughters about the incident. Milena and Antonella were outraged, especially seeing their mother's injured face. While Lucia worked, the girls arrived at the house. They personally gathered Antonio's belongings and put them outside. After that, they called a locksmith and changed the locks. This time the man submitted, but while leaving he made several threats that greatly frightened all 3 women. They decided to act more decisively. The Russa family united again in the face of a new threat, mistakenly believing that through joint efforts they would overcome any difficulties. The next day after the incident, all 3 went to the police station to file a report against the man. The greatest concern was the fact that Antonio possessed firearms. Death threats from the man against the background of his cruel behavior sounded extremely threatening. Unfortunately, the Carabinieri representatives received the report without enthusiasm, despite the presence of obvious signs of physical violence on the woman's face. To attract proper attention from the police, Lucia was forced to visit a medical facility to document bodily injuries and obtain an appropriate certificate. This required additional time and travel. Antonella once again expressed outrage at the principles of law enforcement functioning in Italy. At the station, the women were tried to be calmed down, even emphasizing the legality of Antonio's pistol ownership due to having all necessary permits. The report was accepted only after persistent requests. Law enforcement officers verified the provided information and assured the women of the absence of threat. According to their data, Antonio had returned to his town and was living there with his daughters. It seemed Antonio had retreated, and the Russa family gradually restored peace. All 3 even spent nights together, as the girl's mother was afraid to remain alone. When the weekend ended, Antonella realized that from now on Lucia would independently commute to work and return home. During these periods, the woman would be most vulnerable, so the daughter decided to accompany her for the first time to ensure safety. No one could predict that this decision would become fatal. On the contrary, the girl planned to continue the accompaniment until Lucia fully restored her mental equilibrium. On February 20, 2007, at 5 o'clock in the morning, both women got out of bed, had breakfast together, and around 6 o'clock headed to the factory in Antonella's car. The girl drove her mother to work, they said goodbye, wishing each other a good day. After that, she intended to return home to prepare for university classes. The girl couldn't know that they had been under surveillance the entire time. Of course, the observer was Antonio, unable to accept the collapse of his plans. Lucia hadn't yet managed to reach the workshop when gunshots rang out on the street. The woman instantly felt that disaster had struck, ran outside and saw the Fiat Tipo, the car in which her daughter had brought her. Antonella was in the driver's seat, her body thrown back against the seat back in an unnatural position. The girl was visible through the shattered side window. Approaching, the mother saw blood flowing from wounds and her daughter without any signs of response. The woman immediately called emergency services. Law enforcement representatives who arrived at the scene found the 23-year-old girl without signs of life. Death had occurred instantly. The car's side window had been broken by some object. It was later established that the killer had shattered it with the handle of the pistol from which he then shot Antonella. In total, 6 shots were recorded, 4 bullets reached their target, 2 of them proved lethal, they were aimed at the victim's face and struck the brain. During the conversation with detectives, Lucia immediately pointed to her former partner Antonio. The woman had no other potentially dangerous people in her circle. His actions fully corresponded to the behavioral model of an abuser who didn't want to let go of his victim. This was exactly the development of events her daughter had repeatedly warned about. Several eyewitnesses observed the attack. All of them described the vehicle and the man whose appearance matched Lucia's former partner, Antonio. According to the reconstruction of events, he pursued the future victim, waiting for a convenient moment to attack. After that, he shot the girl and disappeared from the crime scene. Having received this information, police officers immediately went to Antonio's residence. No one was found at the address of his previous residence with his children before moving in with Lucia. A search was conducted there, but the pistol wasn't found. The suspect's children were questioned. According to their testimony, they hadn't seen their father since the previous day. The older daughter reported that approximately at 10 o'clock in the morning of the fatal day, February 20, 2007, she received an unusual call from Antonio. The father was extremely agitated, spoke incoherently, reported committing something terrible, but didn't explain details. The man asked for forgiveness, addressed his older daughter with a request to take care of the younger children, as he wouldn't have the opportunity to see them in the near future. Without going into explanations, the main suspect ended the conversation and disappeared. Antonio wasn't at home, his whereabouts couldn't be established, but his daughter provided her father's phone number, through which detectives contacted him. At first, he refused to cooperate. It became clear that the man was hiding, concealing something, and concerns arose about a possible suicide attempt. Negotiation specialists and expert psychologists joined the case, repeatedly calling Antonio, trying to convince him to voluntarily surrender to law enforcement. After several such attempts, their efforts were crowned with success. The man arrived at the police station and confessed to the murder. He also immediately handed over his weapon to the carabinieri, a pistol that was in his car, Fiat Stilo. A subsequent ballistic examination confirmed that Antonella had been killed with this weapon. He had fired all the cartridges from the magazine at the girl. The man remained quite restrained, showing signs of remorse. The only strange thing in his testimony was his claim that he had killed not Antonella, but his former Lucia, taking revenge for her rejecting and abandoning him. It gave the impression of the man's mental inadequacy. At the time of the murder, Antonio Carbonaro was 50 years old. During a preliminary court hearing, Antonio's lawyer petitioned for the hearings to be conducted under a simplified procedure. A request was also submitted for a psychiatric examination, as the defense considered the cause of the tragedy to be the defendant's mental disorders. Supposedly the attack was committed in a state of affect. However, the prosecution insisted this was ordinary cunning. In reality, Antonella was killed intentionally, as she was perceived as a barrier to Antonio's control over Lucia. As a result, all defense motions were rejected. Following the hearings, Antonio was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The prosecution demanded a longer term, citing aggravating factors, death threats and domestic violence. However, these arguments weren't taken into account. After the verdict was pronounced, the defendant filed several appeals, one of which was granted. Repeat hearings were held, but their result was confirmation of Antonio's guilt and sentence. The tragic death of a young, purposeful, ambitious girl prompted the renewed raising of acute questions about security and the low effectiveness of law enforcement agencies in Italy. Lucia repeatedly gave interviews to journalists, telling the story of her daughter's death. The woman emphasized that they had sought help from the Carabinieri, but the police didn't take any measures to ensure their protection. A few days before the tragedy, the mother and daughters went to the police station with a report against Antonio Carbonaro. They reported facts of domestic violence on his part, threats, as well as stalking after the breakup. In addition, they reported his possession of firearms and the high level of danger. However, instead of providing assistance, the police officers assured the women that Antonio was in his hometown and posed no threat to them. The police commissioner tried to justify his subordinates' actions, who couldn't respond promptly due to bureaucratic procedures. Supposedly the police officers took the case into development but didn't have time to take measures due to lack of time. At the same time, they acted strictly according to instructions, no negligence was allowed. About 700 residents gathered at the farewell ceremony for the girl in Salerno. Many couldn't hold back tears and believe in the reality of what had happened. A young ambitious girl died defending her mother from a domestic tyrant. This tragedy shocked the entire local community. Antonella's mother and sister Milena suffered the most, as they couldn't recover for a long time after the second severe loss in the family. The first public figure to honor Antonella Russa's memory was performer Laura Pausini. The deceased had planned with friends to attend her performance scheduled for June 2, 2007. The entire group had already purchased concert tickets. Learning about the tragic fate of one of her fans, the singer dedicated the performance at San Siro to the deceased. Later, Antonella was posthumously awarded a gold medal for civic valor from Italian President Giorgio Napolitano. But not only famous personalities sought to honor the memory of the brave girl who protected her mother at the cost of her own life. The University of Salerno, where she was studying, made significant efforts to preserve the memory of the student. In October 2014, the city mayor, together with Antonella's mother, appealed to the Educational Institutions Administration. A proposal was made to award Antonella a degree in foreign languages and literature posthumously. It turned out that in the months following her death, the girl was supposed to receive her diploma, had completed her project and planned its defense, but didn't have time to accomplish this. In 2015, an official conference dedicated to combating gender violence was held at one of the university campuses. The teachers who spoke at the event remembered Antonella well. She always showed activity in this area and was a participant in all events related to equal rights for men and women. The girl worked on raising student awareness about issues of discrimination and domestic violence. The opening of the region's first assistance center for women who had suffered from domestic violence was planned for 2016. It was located in premises provided by the university. The center was Antonella's idea, so it received her name. The main task of the new institution became providing help and support to women who had suffered from partners. The center's activities are carried out in cooperation with psychologists and lawyers whose consultations are available there. In 2022, a square named after Antonella Russa was opened in Salerno. Unfortunately, despite all these initiatives, the problem of protecting women and providing them with assistance remains extremely relevant in Italy. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.